My children read my will before I died, so I quietly wrote a new one. The hospital room they put me in at Piedmont, Atlanta, was on the 4th floor, east wing, with a window that looked out over the parking deck and, if you craned your neck just right, a narrow slice of the city skyline beyond it. I know this because I lay in that bed for 6 days staring at it. Not sleeping, mostly, despite what it must have looked like to anyone who came in and out of that room. The pneumonia had hit fast, the way pneumonia does when you're 71 and you've been pushing yourself too hard, and the weather in Atlanta decides to go from 72 degrees to 41 degrees overnight in the middle of March. One Tuesday, I was fine. By Thursday, I was calling my neighbor Rutherland from the kitchen floor because I couldn't get myself up. And by Thursday night, I was on the 4th floor of Piedmont with an IV in my arm and an oxygen monitor on my finger and a doctor named Dr. Osei Bonsu standing at the foot of my bed looking at me with the measured expression that doctors use when they want to convey concern without triggering panic. I was sick. I was not dying. This distinction matters because my children, 2 of them, anyway, appeared to have made a different assessment. The night everything changed was a Tuesday, 6 days in. The day nurse had turned off the overhead light around 7 in the evening, leaving only the small reading lamp in the corner and the blue glow of the monitors, and I had closed my eyes because the fluorescent had been giving me a headache all day. I was not asleep. I am a woman who spent 30 years in schools, 15 as a teacher, 15 as a principal. And the single most valuable skill I acquired in those 30 years was the ability to appear entirely inattentive while absorbing every word and movement in a room. I learned it from children, specifically from the 4th graders at Oglethorpe Elementary in 1978 who thought they were getting away with things because my back was turned at the chalkboard. My son Marcus came in first. I heard his shoes. Good leather, the expensive kind that barely make a sound on linoleum, which is itself a kind of statement. He was on the phone when he came in, the low wrap-up tones of a conversation being ended rather than begun. "I'll circle back tomorrow morning. Just hold the filing." Attorney voice. The call ended, and I heard him settle into the chair nearest the window. My daughter Denise came in 2 minutes later. I knew it was her before she spoke because of her perfume. Linardit by Givenchy, which she has worn since she turned 40, and which she applies with a more generous hand than I've ever suggested. She pulled the second chair close to Marcus, and they were quiet together for a moment, the kind of quiet that people hold when they're about to say something they've been waiting to say. I kept my eyes closed. I kept them closed for 42 minutes. What I heard during those 42 minutes is what I am going to tell you today. All of it, every detail, because you deserve the full picture. Because I think some of you already know this feeling. Not maybe these exact words or this exact room, but the feeling of lying very still while your own children discuss your assets in present tense, as though you were already past tense. As though the life you built and the woman who built it were 2 separate things and only one of them still mattered. The next morning, when the day nurse came in to check my vitals, I asked her if she had a legal pad and a pen. Her name was Neka. She looked at me for a moment, then she said, "Let me check the supply closet." She came back with a yellow legal pad, the kind with the red margin line. She also brought me a blue Bic pen and a look that said she was not going to ask questions. I sat up in that hospital bed, with my IV still in and the oxygen monitor still on my finger, and I wrote down every word I could remember from the night before. My handwriting is neat and upright, the product of the nuns at St. Anthony's Grammar School in Birmingham, Alabama, who believed in penmanship the way other people believe in breathing. I filled 4 pages. When I was done, I folded the pages in half and put them in the zippered pocket of my overnight bag. Then I asked Neka if she could get me the number for my attorney's office, and I started planning. My name is Vivian Louise Prescott. Vivian Louise Webb before I married Theodore James Prescott in June of 1976, and Vivian Louise Prescott again after Theodore and I divorced in 1994 because I had been Prescott for 18 years by then and I saw no reason to go backward. My children carry that name, and I carry it, and I intend to be buried under it. So Prescott it has been, and Prescott it will remain. I am 71 years old. I was born in Birmingham, Alabama, in 1954, the second of 5 children born to Reverend Ezekiel Webb and Luella Mae Webb née Morrison. My father was a Baptist minister and a man of absolute conviction, the kind of man who believed that God was in the details of how you lived your daily life, the discipline of it, the order of it, the standards you held yourself to when no one was watching. My mother was a seamstress who made the most beautiful things from the most modest materials and who could look at a bolt of fabric and know, before she'd cut a single stitch, exactly what it was going to become. I am my mother's daughter and my father's daughter in roughly equal measure, and I have spent 71 years trying to figure out which one of them is winning on any given day. I grew up in a house where education was not optional. It was not even a subject of discussion. It was the air we breathed. My father preached on Sunday, and on Monday morning, he sat at the kitchen table with all 5 of us and checked our homework. Not because he had time for it. He did not. But because he believed that the education of his children was a divine obligation, not a parental preference, and he did not take divine obligations lightly. I graduated from Parker High School in 1972, valedictorian of my class. I went to Spelman College on a full academic scholarship, which my father told me was God's confirmation of a path already chosen, and which I privately thought was the result of straight A's and 3 applications for external grants that nobody told me about but me. I graduated from Spelman in 1976 with a degree in education and a minor in English literature, and I married Theodore Prescott that same June at my father's church in a dress my mother made from white Dupioni silk that took her 4 months. Theodore was a good man in many ways. He was a good father, present, patient, genuinely interested in the lives of our 3 children. He was also a man who found monogamy conceptually agreeable but practically difficult, and after the 3rd time I had evidence that he had been more loyal to the concept than the practice, I filed for divorce. The children were 17, 14, and 10. Theodore moved to Decatur and remained involved in their lives, which was the best thing he ever did after the marriage ended, and I respected him for it. I went back to school for my master's in educational administration at Georgia State in 1995 while working full-time as a teacher at Mays High School in Southwest Atlanta. I became assistant principal at Mays in 1999. I became principal of Frederick Douglass High School in 2004. I ran that school for 14 years until I retired in 2018, and when I left, I had an 87% graduation rate, up from 61% when I arrived, and a faculty that I had built deliberately, carefully, one teacher at a time, choosing always for the person who cared more about the children than about the salary. I say all of this not to brag. I say it so you understand the kind of woman I am, the kind who does not leave things to chance or circumstance, who builds things with intention and maintains them with discipline, who has been the person other people leaned on for so long that she has had to actively practice letting herself be held. I am not good at being helpless. Piedmont Hospital in March was very challenging for me in that particular way. What I built over a lifetime of working. My house in Cascade Heights, which I bought in 1998 for $187,000 and which is paid off and worth somewhere north of $620,000 now in a market that has done extraordinary things to Atlanta real estate. A small commercial property on the west side. A strip unit with 3 tenants, 2 of them long-term, that generates about $4,400 a month in rent income. Retirement accounts from 22 years in the Atlanta public school system, a life insurance policy. Some individual investment accounts that I have been managing conservatively and well since Theodore and I divided our assets in 1994. I am comfortable. I am not ostentatiously wealthy, but I am the kind of secure that my father always wanted for his children and his children's children. I worked every day of my adult life to become this woman, and I will not apologize for having done it successfully. My 3 children, Marcus Theodore Prescott, 47 years old, corporate attorney at a firm in Buckhead. He graduated from Morehouse and then from Emory Law School, and he has been quietly proud of himself in the way that I always told you so pride works for about 20 years. He is good at his work. He is careful, methodical, detail-oriented. These are things I recognize in myself, and I take some responsibility for having modeled them, though Marcus has taken those qualities in a direction that is sometimes more clinical than I intended. He married a woman named Sandra Lee Hayward in 2002, who is an interior designer and a perfectly pleasant person who has always treated me with the cordial distance that some daughters-in-law maintain as a matter of policy. They have 2 children, Jordan, 19, and Naomi, 16. Denise Elaine Prescott, 44 years old. Real estate agent, licensed broker, her own small firm on the west side of Atlanta called Prescott Premier Properties, which she has been running for 6 years and which does very well in a hot market. Denise is sharp and motivated and has her father's charm and her mother's work ethic, which is a combination that opens a lot of doors. She was married to a man named Gerald Watkins from 2006 to 2015. The divorce was difficult, and I helped her through it. And she remarried in 2019 to a man named Terrell Bright, who is in insurance and who I think is a genuinely good match for her. No children. She says she and Terrell are happy without them. I believe her. Kevin Deshawn Prescott, 40 years old, the youngest. Kevin has had what I would call a winding road. A failed restaurant business in his mid-30s that cost him significant money, a divorce from his wife Kendra in 2017, and a period of genuine difficulty and depression that he does not talk about much, but that I watched from close range with my heart in my throat for the better part of 2 years. He is now raising his daughter, Amara, who is 14 and brilliant, mostly on his own, and he has been working at the Postal Service for the past 3 years. Steady. Rebuilding. Kevin is the child who most reminds me of my mother. The same quality of noticing things, the same care in the way he attends to people, the same determination to keep trying after a setback that would have finished someone with less resilience. He has never been the most successful of my children on paper. He has always been the most fully human. I love all 3 of my children with a completeness that does not require me to see them uncritically. I know who they each are. I knew before March. March clarified things in ways I could not have anticipated, but the underlying knowledge was always there, in the way that mothers know. Not always with words, but with something older and deeper than words. I had been feeling run down for about 2 weeks before the kitchen floor incident, and I was aware of it and doing nothing about it, which I recognize is the particular foolishness of people who have spent their whole lives being capable, and who therefore resist any suggestion that the body might have its own opinions on the matter. It had been a full winter. In January, I had organized a scholarship fundraiser for Frederick Douglass High School, the school I used to run, because I am retired, but I am not done. And the scholarship fund I established there needs to be maintained and grown. The fundraiser involved 6 weeks of planning, a weekend event, and approximately 47 phone calls that I did not need to make, but made anyway, because I trust other people's intentions and not always their follow-through. In February, I had helped Kevin with some paperwork. His lease renewal for his apartment, some things related to Amara's school enrollment, and a custody agreement modification. And I had done my own taxes and the taxes for my church's auxiliary board, which I have been treasurer of since 2015. By the first week of March, I was tired in a way that coffee was not fixing. My chest felt heavy. I was coughing more than I usually cough. My neighbor Ruthelyn, who is 73 and believes in telling people what she sees whether they asked or not, said to me on a Tuesday morning when I was getting my mail, "Vivian, you look gray," I said. "I am not gray, Ruthelyn. I'm tired." She said, "Tired looks gray on dark skin. Go to the doctor." I said I had an appointment scheduled for the following week for my regular checkup. She said, "Not next week. Now." I did not go. I went home and made ginger tea and took some Dayquil and went to bed at 8 o'clock, which I told myself was self-care and which was actually avoidance. The following Thursday morning, I woke up at 4:30 unable to breathe properly. Not gasping. It was not that dramatic, but a heaviness in my chest that made each breath feel like I was lifting something, and a fever that I could feel without a thermometer. I tried to get up to get water, and I got as far as the kitchen before my legs decided they had done enough for the day. I sat down on the kitchen floor, which is cold terracotta tile that I have loved for 20 years, and which is profoundly uncomfortable to sit on in the early morning with a fever. I found my phone in my pocket. I have taken to keeping it in my robe pocket since I turned 68, and my doctor had a conversation with me about fall risk that I found offensive, but ultimately persuasive. And I called Ruthelyn. She arrived in 8 minutes in her housecoat and slippers and called 911 while she was still walking up my front steps. She held my hand on the kitchen floor while we waited for the ambulance, and she said, "I told you Tuesday." I said, "You did." She said, "Do not tell me I didn't." I said, "Ruthelyn, I am on the floor with pneumonia. I am not going to argue with you." She said, "Good. It's about time." The EMTs were professional and kind. Dr. Osei Bonsu met me in the emergency department, and I liked him immediately because he did not talk to me as if I were fragile or diminished. He explained everything he was seeing and everything he was going to do in the direct, collegial way that I have always preferred, as though I were a capable adult who happened to be sick rather than a helpless patient to be managed. He was right that it was pneumonia. He was right that it was serious enough to require hospitalization. He was also right that I was going to be fine, which he told me on the first day, and which I chose to believe, because I am not a woman who has time to contemplate alternatives. They called Marcus because he is listed first on my emergency contact form. He arrived that first evening in his suit, coming directly from the office, with his phone in one hand and his briefcase in the other, and he looked at me in the hospital bed with an expression that I can only describe as complicated. Genuine concern mixed with something else, something calculating, the way lawyers look at a situation, assessing. He said, "Mama, how are you feeling?" I said, "Like I have pneumonia, but I'm going to be fine." He said, "The doctor told me it's serious." I said, "The doctor told me I'm going to be fine." Both of those things can be true. Denise came the next day with a flower arrangement that was beautiful and expensive and filled the room with a scent that competed with the hospital antiseptic in a way that I found both touching and slightly overwhelming. She held my hand and cried a little in the contained way that Denise cries. 2 tears, maximum, and then she composes herself because Denise does not allow herself to appear out of control in any setting, including grief. Kevin came on the 3rd day. He works the morning shift, so he could not come sooner, and he showed up in the afternoon in his postal uniform. Navy, blue, slightly rumpled, the jacket that has a small ink stain on the left cuff that I have told him about at least 3 times. He was carrying a bunch of pink carnations from the CVS on the corner, wrapped in cellophane, the stems not quite even, the kind of flowers that are the opposite of impressive and the opposite of impersonal. He put the carnations in the plastic water pitcher on my bedside table because we didn't have a vase, and he pulled his chair directly to the edge of my bed and sat down and took my hand in both of his and said, "Hey, Mama. I got here as fast as I could." He sat with me for 3 hours. He didn't talk much. He read on his phone occasionally. He went to get me crackers from the vending machine when I said my stomach felt empty. When I drifted off once in the late afternoon, I woke up and he was still there, watching something on his phone with the sound turned low, and he looked up when he heard me wake and said, "You need anything?" That is the kind of man Kevin is. I want you to hold that. I need to tell you this part carefully, because it is the part that I have thought about the most since March, and because getting it wrong, being unfair in any direction, matters to me. My children did not know I could hear them. I want to be honest about that. They came into that room on a Tuesday evening believing that I was heavily medicated and deeply asleep. They were not performing for my benefit. They were not trying to hurt me. They were having what they believed was a private conversation about a situation that was, from their perspective, genuinely relevant and genuinely urgent. Their mother was ill in the hospital, and no one had talked directly about what happened if things got worse. I understand this. I was a principal for 14 years. I have had the experience, many times, of walking past a room where people were saying things they would not say to my face, and I have learned that what people say in those unguarded moments is almost always true. Not always the full truth, not always the most charitable version of the truth, but true in a way that the edited, face-to-face version usually is not. What I heard in that room is true. That is what I have had to sit with. Marcus spoke first, after about 5 minutes of quiet, of them checking their phones and watching me in the dim light. He said, "She's out," Denise said. "You sure?" He said, "Look at her. She's been out since before we got here." He was not correct, but I kept still. Denise said, "Okay." And then, after another pause, "I found it," Marcus said. "Where was it?" Denise said, "Filing cabinet in the office. 2nd drawer." It was in a folder labeled legal documents. It was right there, Marcus. I was looking for the insurance cards, and there it was. I understood in that moment what they were talking about. Denise had a key to my house. All 3 of my children do, for emergencies. Denise had been to my house that weekend. I had been told to water my plants and pick up the mail. She had also, apparently, gone through my home office filing cabinet. I do not know whether she went looking for the will or found it accidentally. I have thought about this question many times, and I have not arrived at a confident answer. Marcus said, "What does it say?" Denise said, "Equal thirds. Marcus, Denise, Kevin. The house goes to all 3 jointly. The commercial property to all 3. Investment accounts split 3 ways." Marcus was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "She hasn't updated it," Denise said. "The date on it is 2016. Marcus said, "A lot has changed since 2016. I felt something cold move through my chest that was not the pneumonia. Denise said, Kevin. Kevin gets a third of everything. At 40 years old. After everything that happened with the restaurant, after the divorce, she paused. Maxine, that money would just be gone in 5 years. She called me Maxine. My daughter, who I carried and birthed and nursed and drove to piano lessons and sat up late with when she was 13 and her first boyfriend broke her heart, called me by my first name. As though I were already an item on a document and not a person in a bed 4 feet from where she was sitting. Marcus said, she's always had a soft spot for Kevin. We all know that. Denise said, I love Kevin. You know I love him. But love and financial sense are 2 different things. Marcus said, the house is the biggest asset. Denise said, 620, 630, maybe now. And the commercial property is generating, what, $4,000 a month? She's never told us exactly. I noted that she knew the approximate value of my house. I noted that she was estimating my rental income. I noted that she had clearly been thinking about this more than she had indicated to me in any conversation we'd ever had. Marcus said, we should probably talk to her financial advisor. Denise said, can we do that without telling her? A pause. Marcus said, I don't know. It's her account. Denise said, well, if we had power of attorney. Marcus said, we don't have power of attorney. Denise said, not yet. I stayed very still. Marcus said, she's going to be fine, Denise. Dr. Osebansu said she's responding to the antibiotics. This isn't a terminal situation. Denise said, I know that. I'm not saying it's terminal. I'm saying she's 71 and she has pneumonia and she's alone and maybe it's time to have some of these conversations. It's not morbid. It's practical, Marcus said. You're right, Denise said. She needs to update the will. And honestly, if she would sit down with us and talk through the estate plan, I think she'd agree that equal thirds doesn't make sense anymore. You and I have built things. Kevin is. Kevin is getting there, but he's 40 and he works at the post office and Kendra took half of everything in the divorce. If she left that commercial property to the 3 of us equally, you and I could manage it. Kevin would cash out his share in 18 months and then what? Marcus was quiet. Then he said, the way she built that property up, she would not want to see it sold off in pieces. Denise said, exactly, Marcus said. So what are you suggesting? Denise said, I think we should have a real conversation with her. When she's better, when she's home, when she's herself. About updating the will to reflect reality. You and I are established. Jordan and Naomi have college funds. We don't need the money the same way. But we are better positioned to be stewards of it. I heard that word. Stewards. I heard it land. Marcus said, I think that's reasonable. I'd want to involve Charles. Or actually, I could draft something. I have the template. Denise said, let's not get ahead of ourselves. Marcus said, no, you're right. First, the conversation. But Denise, be careful how you frame it to her. You know how she is. She'll see it as us trying to control things. Denise said, I'm not trying to control anything. I'm trying to protect what she built. Marcus said, I know. She's proud. She's always been proud. She's not going to take it well if it feels like we're coming at her. Denise said, then we'll come at it from love. Marcus said, right, a silence. Then Denise said, quietly, I've also been thinking, and don't say anything yet, just hear me out, about whether it makes sense to start a conversation about her living situation. That house is too big for one person, and if her health is. And that was when the door opened. Kevin's voice, hey, what are you two talking about? A pause, the small electric pause of people caught in something. Marcus said, just talking about Mama's situation, her care plan, the next steps. Kevin came to the foot of my bed. I could feel his presence there. Something changed in the air of the room when Kevin entered, the way it does with people who carry a quality of attention with them, who make the temperature of a room slightly warmer just by being in it. He said, she's right there, man, Marcus said. She's asleep, Kevin said. She's been sick for 6 days. Can we not do this in her room? Can we go to the waiting area if we need to talk? A pause. Then Marcus said, you're right, we'll table it. Kevin said, yeah, let's table it. And he pulled his chair to my bedside and sat down, and I felt him take my hand, and he said very quietly, just for me, or so he thought, I'm here, Mama. You rest. And I lay there in the dark with my eyes closed and my son's hand on mine and 42 minutes of conversation sitting in my chest alongside the pneumonia. And I breathed as evenly as I could. And I thought, well, now I know. Now I know. I want to be precise about my emotional state in the days following that conversation because I think it matters for understanding what I did next. I was not devastated. I was not surprised. Exactly. Though I would not have predicted this exact shape of things. What I was. And I have looked for the right word many times since, was clarified. That conversation clarified things I had felt without naming, organized things I had sensed without evidence, resolved a fuzziness about my own situation that I had been, if I am honest, avoiding for some time. Here is the truth I had been avoiding. I knew that Marcus and Denise had opinions about how my estate should be handled. Parents always know these things, even when the children are careful. There had been small comments over the years. Marcus mentioning once that the commercial property might benefit from professional management when he found out I managed it myself. Denise showing me articles about estate planning for seniors in what she probably thought was a subtle way. The particular attention they paid whenever I mentioned any health issue, the sharpening of focus that I recognize now, in hindsight, as something more than concern. I had told myself it was love. It was not only love. This is not a comfortable thing to write. These are my children. I chose their names and held them in the early morning dark when they could not sleep, and I watched them become people. And the people they became are people I am proud of in complicated and genuine ways. I do not stop loving them because I see clearly. But I also cannot unsee what I now see. The yellow legal pad gave me something to do with the clarity. I wrote down everything I remembered from the conversation, their exact words where I could recall them, paraphrases where I couldn't. I noted the specific moments that I wanted to remember with precision, Denise finding the will in the filing cabinet. The phrase, power of attorney, not yet. The word stewards. The brief mention of my living situation that Kevin's arrival had interrupted. I wrote it all down in 4 pages of neat, upright handwriting while the morning came in through the east wing window and the breakfast cart rattled in the hallway. Then I sat for a while and looked at the parking deck. I am not a person who makes decisions from anger. I want to be clear about this. If I had rewritten my will from anger, from the hot, immediate pain of lying in that hospital bed and hearing my children discuss my assets, the new will would have been a very different document, and probably a document I would have regretted. Anger makes you subtract. It makes you delete. I had enough experience in 30 years of working with people in conflict to know that decisions made from subtraction are rarely the right ones. What I wanted to think about was not what to take away, but what to build. This is a distinction that matters and that I will come back to. When I was discharged from Piedmont on a Friday, Dr. Osei Bonsu shook my hand and said, "Miss Prescott, you are one of the most cooperative patients I have had the misfortune to watch try to outwork a respiratory illness. Rutherland came to pick me up because I had told Marcus and Denise that I preferred to have a friend bring me home. Marcus had offered. Denise had offered. I thanked them both and said Rutherland had already volunteered and I didn't want to make her feel passed over. This was not entirely true, but it was not entirely false either. Rutherland drove me home in her Buick with the heated seats that she treats like a personal luxury and the gospel station playing at a volume just below a suggestion. She did not ask me questions. She carried my bag up my front steps and made sure the house was warm and unlocked the door with her own key. She has one for the same emergency reason my children do. And she put the bag in my bedroom and then stood in the kitchen doorway and said, "Do you need food? I have a pot of chicken stew on my stove right now." I said, "Yes, please." She went and got it and came back and sat with me while I ate. And she said, "You look like you've been thinking hard." I said, "I have." She said, "You want to talk about it?" I said, "Not yet. Maybe in a few days." She said, "I'll be right there." She pointed at her house through my kitchen window. 3 houses down. Whenever you're ready. That is what a real friend looks like. I want you to recognize it. I spent the first 3 days at home resting the way I was told to, taking the antibiotics, sleeping at regular hours, eating properly, not doing the thing I was tempted to do, which was immediately reorganize my office and begin the legal process in a fury of productivity. I have learned that my body is smarter than my ambition, at least when it comes to pneumonia, and I gave it those 3 days without argument. On the 4th day home, I called Patricia Reed. Patricia Annette Reed is my attorney. She has been my attorney since 2003, when I hired her to handle the legal end of a property dispute involving my next-door neighbor at the time and a fence that encroached 11 inches onto my property. She is 64 years old now, a woman whose physical presence. She is tall, dark-skinned, with close-cropped natural hair that went silver in her 50s, and which she has worn with the confidence of someone who never considered any alternative, communicates competence the way certain buildings communicate history. Just by standing in a room, you understand that something serious and lasting was built here. She does estate planning, real estate law, and business contracts. She wrote my original will in 2016 and updated my general durable power of attorney at the same time. She has reviewed my rental agreements every time a tenant has turned over. She knows my financial picture in full, more fully, in certain respects, than my children do, which is by design. I called her on a Wednesday morning. Her assistant put me through immediately. She said, "Vivian, how are you feeling? I heard you'd been in the hospital." I said, "I'm better. I'm home and I'm recovering." She said, "What can I do for you?" I said, "Patricia, I need to rewrite my will." A brief pause. Not surprise. Patricia does not do surprised, but the particular attentive quiet she uses when she's listening carefully. I said, "I'm going to tell you what happened. I need you to just listen until I'm done, and then I need you to tell me what my options are and what's legally sound." She said, "All right." I told her everything. What Denise had found in my office, what Marcus and Denise had discussed in that hospital room, the phrase about power of attorney, the word stewards, Kevin coming in and ending it, the yellow legal pad, all of it, precisely and without drama, the way I report things to people I trust with something important. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Vivian, before we talk about the will, do you need to think about the power of attorney situation? If Marcus and Denise are considering that avenue?" I said, "I'm already ahead of you on that. I want to review the existing durable POA and make sure it cannot be leveraged by either of them in a direction I haven't authorized. What are my options?" She said, "The simplest option is to update the existing document to name your choice of agent, single agent or agents with defined scope. You can restrict what they can and cannot do. You can also put a springing condition on it, meaning it only becomes effective under specific, documented circumstances. For example, a written determination by 2 physicians that you are incapacitated." I said, "That's what I want. A springing POA with clear medical triggers and a single agent." She said, "Who do you want as your agent?" I said, "Kevin." Another brief pause. Not judgment. Patricia does not judge, just a careful breath of acknowledgement. She said, "All right, now let's talk about the will." I told her what I wanted. I had been thinking about it for 11 days by then. In the hospital, on the drive home, in the 3 days of prescribed rest. And I had thought about it the way I think about everything that matters, not from the first emotion, but from the question underneath the first emotion, which is always, what is the right thing to do? Let me tell you how I arrived at the answer to that question. My father used to say, "Don't make a decision based on what someone deserves. Make a decision based on what serves the most people without compromising your integrity." I thought about this for a long time, and I decided that he was right, and that he was also slightly incomplete. Because sometimes what serves the most people requires you to make a decision that looks like it's about deserving and isn't, or looks like it's about fairness and is about something more granular than fairness. I thought about what I had actually built and why I had built it. I did not build my estate to reward past behavior. I built it to create forward movement, to put foundation under the people who needed foundation, and to honor the ones who had already built their own. Marcus and Denise have built things. Marcus has a career, a home he owns in Buckhead, college funds for his children, a pension accumulating from nearly 25 years of practice. He does not need my commercial property. He has said himself that he would be a steward of it. He is right, but a steward is not an heir. A steward is a caretaker. And if I want a caretaker for that property after I am gone, I will designate one in writing. I do not need to give it away to accomplish that. Denise has her firm, which is doing well. She has Terrell, who is stable and income producing. She has her life, which she has built with drive and intelligence, and which she does not need my inheritance to sustain. Kevin has Amara. Amara is 14 years old. She is the only grandchild of mine who is not already secured. Jordan and Naomi have their parents' resources and Marcus's careful financial planning behind them. Amara has Kevin, who loves her completely and provides for her faithfully within his means, which are not large. Amara has nothing guaranteed beyond that. I thought about what it would mean for Amara to grow up knowing there was a home. My home, the house in Cascade Heights, where she has spent Christmases and Thanksgivings and random Saturday afternoons. The house where I taught her to make biscuits from scratch and where she read her first chapter book on my living room floor, knowing that house would be available to her, that it would not need to be sold, that it would not be divided between 3 people with 3 different financial needs and 3 different opinions about what to do with it. I thought about what my mother would have done. My mother, Luella Mae Webb, who made beautiful things from modest materials and who knew, before she cut a single stitch, exactly what they were going to become. I called Patricia and I told her what I wanted the new will to say. I want to be careful here because I know that some of you hearing this will have strong feelings about what I chose, and I want to explain my thinking fully before you reach a verdict. I did not disinherit Marcus and Denise. I want to say that clearly. They are my children. Whatever I heard in that hospital room, they are still my children, and they are still the people I spent the better part of my adult life raising and loving and worrying over. Cutting them out entirely would have been the decision of my pain, not my wisdom, and I do not make decisions from pain if I can help it. What I did was realign. Realign what each person receives to what each person actually needs and what will actually move the most life forward. This is the clearest way I can describe it. Here is what the new will says. The house in Cascade Heights. The asset that Marcus called the biggest in that hospital room goes to Kevin outright and entirely. With it comes a stipulation that his daughter, Amara, my granddaughter, has the legal right to reside in that property until she reaches the age of 25, should she need it. This means that even if Kevin's circumstances change, even if something happens to Kevin, Amara has a roof that belongs to her family until she is old enough to have built her own. Kevin will not sell that house for a quick return. This is not a strategic guess. This is knowledge. Kevin is a man who understands what it means to lose something you needed to keep. He lost his business. He lost his marriage. He knows the difference between an asset and an anchor. He will keep that house and take care of it, and someday it will go to Amara, and that is exactly what I want. The commercial property on the west side, the strip unit, the tenants, the $4,400 a month, goes to Kevin and to a charitable trust I am establishing in my mother's name. The trust will fund educational programs at historically Black schools in Atlanta, beginning with the scholarship fund I already run at Frederick Douglass High School. Kevin receives 60% of the property income. The trust receives 40%. When Kevin passes, God willing, a very long time from now, his share transfers to the trust as well. My investment accounts, I have divided them as follows. Specific education bequests go to each of my 3 grandchildren, Jordan, Naomi, and Amara, in amounts calculated to cover 4 years of undergraduate education at a state university, adjusted for inflation at the time of my death. These bequests go directly to the grandchildren, in trust until they reach 18, and they do not pass through their parents. This means that Jordan and Naomi receive a meaningful inheritance from me regardless of anything their father did or did not do. They are innocent in all of this, and they deserve to know their grandmother loved them enough to think about their futures directly. The remainder of the investment accounts, after the education trusts are funded, goes to Kevin. Marcus receives a specific monetary bequest of $35,000. Denise receives a specific monetary bequest of $35,000. These are not nothing. They are meaningful amounts that I thought carefully about and that reflect my understanding that they are my children and that love is present in this document, even where the larger assets are not. But they are not equal shares of everything. They are not the house. They are not the property. With each bequest to Marcus and to Denise, Patricia has included, at my instruction, a letter that I wrote. It is not a list of grievances. It is an explanation. I wrote it the way my father would have, directly, from love, without cruelty and without softening of the truth. I wrote 2 versions. The letter to Marcus says, in part, Marcus, you told Denise that you wanted to be a steward of what I built. I have been thinking about that word since I heard it. A steward manages something on behalf of someone else. What you manage on behalf of me after I am gone is my memory and the standard I tried to hold. In my work, in my choices, in the way I treated people. That stewardship requires no financial instrument to execute. You are already a successful man. You have built things, and you will build more things. You do not need my house. You need to know that I loved you and that I saw you clearly, and that seeing you clearly did not change the love. Both of those things are true, and they always will be. The letter to Denise says, in part, Denise, you found my will in my filing cabinet, and you read it while I was in the hospital. I have never told you that I know this. I am telling you now, in writing, after I am gone, so that you have the full truth from me rather than a version you have to guess at. I do not write this to shame you. I write it because I raised you to be honest, and I want to be honest with you. I also want you to know, I never doubted that you loved me. I doubted, for a time, whether the love was bigger than the calculation. I am choosing to believe it is, because you are my daughter, and I will go to my grave believing the best of who you are capable of being, even when you have shown me something less. Patricia read these letters before including them in the will packet. She said, Vivian, these are the most honest letters I have ever attached to an estate document. I said, then they are doing their job. I signed the new will on a Thursday in April, 6 weeks after I was discharged from Piedmont. Patricia had 2 witnesses and a notary. I also signed the new springing durable power of attorney naming Kevin as my agent, effective only upon written certification of incapacity by 2 licensed physicians. I was in my right mind. I was recovered from the pneumonia and healthy by every measure Dr. Osei Bonsu had checked at my follow-up appointment. I was, as Patricia said when I thanked her afterward, one of the most clear-eyed clients she had worked with in her career. I went home and made myself a cup of Earl Grey tea and sat in the garden behind the Cascade Heights house. My garden, the one with the gardenias along the back fence that I planted the year I moved in, now 26 years tall and deep and abundant. And I sat there in the April afternoon and I felt something settle. I had made a decision from wisdom, not anger. I had honored my children, all 3 of them, with honesty rather than accommodation. I had put foundation under the people who needed foundation. My mother would have known exactly what this was going to become. Now. Here is where people might have expected me to wait. To wait until I was gone, let the will speak for itself. Let Patricia's office deliver the news, never have to witness the reaction. Some people would counsel that. Stay above it. Stay clean. Let the document do the work and be done with it. That is not who I am. I spent 30 years in schools where I watched conflict fester because the people with authority chose to manage it from a distance, through policies and procedures and letters sent home, through intermediaries and bureaucracies, instead of walking into the room and saying the direct thing to the people who needed to hear it. I watched that approach fail more times than I can count. The conflict doesn't resolve when you refuse to be present in it. It just changes shape. I had rewrote my will in April. I let the summer pass. I wanted to be fully recovered. I wanted to be certain. I wanted the weather to be good, because I am a woman who believes that some conversations need sun. In August, I invited all 3 of my children to dinner at the Cascade Heights house. Marcus and Sandra, Denise and Terrell, Kevin and Amara. All my grandchildren. Jordan was home from his first year at Morehouse. Naomi came with Marcus. Amara arrived with Kevin, carrying a store-bought pecan pie that she had decorated with a fork in a pattern of her own invention, and which was genuinely one of the most beautiful pies I had ever seen, in terms of effort, if not necessarily in terms of execution. I made dinner the way I always make dinner for a full house. Fried chicken and potato salad and collard greens and cornbread, and a pitcher of sweet tea and a pitcher of lemonade and a store-bought pound cake that I put on a good cake plate so it would not look store-bought. I set my dining room table with the good linens, the ones I bought in Charleston in 2012 from a woman who embroidered them herself. I put candles out. I lit them. Dinner was dinner. Loud and warm and full, the way dinner is when you put enough people in a room together and there is good food. Amara and Jordan talked about music with the intensity of 2 young people who have just discovered they share a taste. Naomi helped me carry dishes. Sandra and Denise talked about real estate because they always talk about real estate, which is one thing they have in common. Terrell told a story about his drive from their side of Atlanta that was longer than it needed to be, but genuinely funny by the end. Kevin ate 2 full plates and looked happy, the uncomplicated happy that Kevin gets when he is somewhere he belongs. After dinner, when the grandchildren had moved to the living room and the adults were around the dining table with coffee, I said, I have something to tell you all. The table shifted. The temperature of the room changed in the specific way it does when a person with authority calls for attention. I have felt this shift many times, at the front of a classroom, in a conference room, at the head of a faculty meeting. Everyone present understood that we had moved from dinner to something else. I said, I am going to tell you something that will be difficult to hear. I am going to ask you to listen until I am finished before anyone responds. And when I am done, I want us to be able to talk about it as a family. Honestly, without defensiveness, or at least with as little defensiveness as we can manage. Can we agree to that? Sandra and Terrell exchanged a brief glance. Kevin looked at me with his particular quality of complete attention. Marcus and Denise both went very still. I said, in March, when I was in Piedmont Hospital with the pneumonia, I was awake on a Tuesday evening when Marcus and Denise came to visit. I was not asleep. I heard a conversation that I believe was not intended for my ears. Marcus closed his eyes briefly. Denise made a small sound that was not quite a word. I said, I am not going to recite it back to you line by line because I don't want this to feel like a trial. What I am going to tell you is what I learned from it and what I did with what I learned. I said, I learned that Denise found my will in my filing cabinet while I was in the hospital. I learned that you both believed my estate plan needed to change. I learned that you were considering a conversation about power of attorney. And I learned, I paused here because I wanted to be precise, that the word Kevin used was right, that it was not the right place or time for that conversation, and Kevin understood that when the two of you did not. Kevin, across the table, said nothing. He looked at me. Marcus said, Mama. I said, let me finish, Marcus. Please. He stopped. I said, I want you to know that I heard everything that was said, and I want you to know that I believe you love me. I believe that the conversation that night came from love, combined with fear, combined with the kind of financial self-interest that all people have, and that not everyone acknowledges honestly. I am not here to condemn you for being human. I am here to be honest with you, because I think I owe you honesty more than I owe you comfort. I said, after I was discharged from the hospital, I contacted my attorney. I rewrote my will. The silence was absolute. Then Denise said, what does that mean? I said, it means I reconsidered the distribution. I thought about what each of you has, what each of you needs, and what I wanted my estate to actually accomplish when I am gone. What would move the most life forward for the most people? Marcus said, his voice very controlled. Can you tell us what changed? I said, yes. That's why I'm telling you now, so you hear it from me directly rather than from Patricia's office after I'm gone. That's the kind of woman I want to be. And I told them. I told them about the house going to Kevin. And I watched Marcus's jaw tighten, and I kept going. I told them about Amara's right of residence. And I saw Denise's eyes fill, though I was not sure yet whether those were tears of grief or anger or something more complicated. I told them about the commercial property split and the charitable trust in my mother's name. I told them about the education trusts for all 3 grandchildren. I told them about the $35,000 bequests to each of them and the letters that would accompany those bequests. I told them about the letters. Marcus said, you wrote us letters explaining why we're getting less. I said, I wrote you letters because I thought you deserved an honest explanation. Not a legal document with numbers on it, but words from your mother about what she was thinking and why. Denise said, Marcus and I have given more to this family financially. We've been responsible. We've. I said, Denise, you have both been successful. I know that. I am proud of that. I'm telling you that success doesn't automatically create entitlement to an inheritance. You've built things. Kevin is rebuilding. Amara hasn't had the chance to build anything yet. I put the foundation where the foundation is needed. That's all this is. Denise said, it doesn't feel like that's all it is. I said, I know it doesn't. And I'm not telling you how to feel about it. I'm telling you what I decided and why. Marcus said, did Kevin know about this? Kevin said, no. His voice was quiet and even. I didn't know any of it. Not the hospital conversation, not the new will, not any of it until tonight. Marcus looked at him for a long moment. Kevin looked back. Marcus said, I owe you an apology. Kevin said, yeah. They looked at each other across my dining room table. My 2 sons, 47 and 40, the attorney and the postman, and something passed between them that I did not fully understand and did not need to. Denise said, Mama, the house. I said, yes. She said, I grew up in that house. I said, I know you did. So did Marcus and Kevin. That's why I thought carefully about what it meant to leave it to someone who would keep it, rather than divide it between 3 people with 3 different situations and no legal mechanism to prevent it from being sold. She said, you think we would have sold it. I said, I think it would have been very difficult for 3 people with different financial needs and different lives to agree on what to do with a $620,000 asset jointly held. I think a conversation would have happened, eventually, about whether to sell. And I think the house would have been lost. She was quiet. I said, your grandmother's dining table is in that house. The gardenias along the back fence. My father's Bible that he gave me when I graduated from Spelman. Kevin is not going to sell any of that. Do you understand? Denise looked at Kevin. Kevin said, quietly, I'll never sell it. Another long silence. Then Sandra, who had been quiet through all of this, spoke. She said, Vivian, thank you for telling us now. A lot of people wouldn't. She paused. Marcus, you have our house. The kids have what they need. I think we need to respect this. Marcus looked at his wife. Something moved across his face. Then he nodded, slowly, the nod of a man recalibrating. Not in defeat, but in the harder work of genuine reckoning. He said, Mama, I'm sorry for what happened in that hospital room. I let something take over that I'm not proud of, and I'm sorry you were there to hear it. I said, I know you are, and I believe you. Denise said, I'm sorry too. Her voice cracked slightly on the last word, and she pressed her lips together and looked at the ceiling the way she does when she is refusing to fully cry in company. I said, Denise, look at me. She looked at me. I said, you are my daughter. Nothing that happens with this will change that. I love you without condition, and I always will. What I needed you to know, what I could not leave without telling you, is that I see clearly, that I am not someone to be managed or arranged around, that my choices about my own life and my own estate are mine to make, and I made them. She nodded. I said, now. I have a pound cake in the kitchen, and there is enough left for everyone. I'd like for us to have dessert together, if you're willing. Kevin stood up and said, I'll get the plates. He went to the kitchen. After a moment, Amara appeared in the dining room doorway. She must have heard some of what was said, though I couldn't know how much. And she looked at the table, and she looked at me, and I looked back at her. She is a beautiful child. She has Kevin's quality of attention and Kendra's cheekbones and her own particular combination of the two that has produced something entirely her own. She looked at me with those eyes, and she said, Grandma Vivian, you okay? I said, I am perfectly fine, baby. Come sit by me. She came and sat beside me, and she took my hand the way her father takes my hand, with both of hers, and she leaned her head slightly toward my shoulder without quite resting it there, in the way of a teenager who wants contact and hasn't fully decided it's allowed. I put my arm around her. Kevin came back with the plates, and we had dessert. It is November now. 8 months since that night in Piedmont Hospital. 5 months since the dinner. Things are not the same as they were. I do not expect them to be, and I would not trust it if they were. When something real has been said between people, it changes the configuration, and the changed configuration is more honest than the old one. And honesty is always better, even when it is harder to live in. Marcus called me in September. He said he had been thinking, since the dinner, about some things he wanted to say that he hadn't found the right words for in August. He said, Mama, I think I've been so focused on protecting things. Protecting our assets, our future, your legacy, that I turned it into a project and forgot that you were a person in the middle of it, not an estate to be administered. He said, that's not who I want to be. I told him I believed him. I told him the man I raised is capable of being something better than what I saw in that hospital room, and that I intended to keep believing that. Denise called me in October. She called on a Sunday morning, which is when we usually talk, and she said, can I come over? I said yes. She came with coffee from the place on Cascade Road that I like, and we sat in my garden with the late season sun still warm on the gardenias, and we talked for 2 hours about things we hadn't talked about in a long time. Her first marriage, what those years cost her, why she works the way she works, the drive of it, the fear underneath the drive, the way that having very little stability growing up, because those were the years after Theodore and I divorced, when things were lean, made her determined, in a way that has not always served her, to secure everything within reach. She said, I think I've been treating people like real estate, like assets to position. She said, I don't want to be that person. I told her she wasn't only that person. I told her that I loved the parts of her that were also my mother, the drive, the beauty she made from what she had. I told her that those parts were real and worth keeping. Kevin knows the house is coming to him. We had that conversation privately, just the two of us, before I told the others, because I owed it to him to tell him first. His response was, it was Kevin. He sat for a long time not saying anything. And then he said, Mama, I would have been fine with whatever you decided. I said, I know. That's part of why I decided this. He cried a little, the Kevin way. Not the one tear wiped away quickly of his brother, but a slow, quiet few tears that he didn't try to stop, that he just let be there. Then he said, Amara is going to flip when she finds out. I said, don't tell her yet. Let it be between us for now. He said, yes, ma'am. Amara was over last weekend. She helped me replant 2 of the gardenias that had gotten scraggly at the ends. She got soil on her good jeans and didn't complain. She told me about a boy at her school she was starting to like. She asked me what I thought she should study in college. I told her I thought she should study whatever she was most afraid to want, because the things we're afraid to want are usually the things that matter most to us. She said, that's a weird answer, Grandma Vivian. I said, most true things are. She thought about it. Then she said, I think I want to be a doctor. I said, then be one. She looked at me. Then she said, my dad says you can do anything you decide to do. I said, your father is correct. She said, he talks about you a lot. He says you're the strongest person he knows. I said, he gives me too much credit. She said, he says you never fold. I sat with that for a moment, with my hands in the garden soil and the November sun on my face, and this 14-year-old girl looking at me with those eyes. I said, Amara, your father has never folded either. He just doesn't always know it. She nodded slowly, like she was filing that away. Now let me tell you what I want you to take from all of this. I want you to understand that your estate is yours. Every dollar you saved, every choice you made, every sacrifice you absorbed, that belongs to you. It is not a reward pool to be distributed based on who performed best or who was most vocal or who was most strategic about positioning themselves. You get to decide what it's for, not your children, not your grandchildren, not the person in the hospital room chair believing you were asleep. You. I want you to understand that hearing an uncomfortable truth is not the same as being destroyed by it. When I heard what Marcus and Denise said in that room, I did not crumble. I wrote it down. I thought about it. I made a decision. This is something I want you to practice. Not because you should suppress your feelings, but because feelings are the first wave, and they are not always the wisest wave. The wisest wave comes after. Wait for it. I want you to understand the difference between giving and being taken from. I gave my children a home to grow up in and the best education I could provide and 35 years of showing up. That was giving. What I heard in the hospital room was not love receiving what love had offered. It was people calculating what they stood to gain. You have to know the difference. Not to become hard or guarded, but to see clearly. Seeing clearly is not the opposite of love. It is the precondition of real love, because you cannot fully love what you cannot see, honestly. I want you to understand that equity and equality are different things. Equal thirds sounds fair. It is the word fair that people use when they want to avoid the harder conversation about who actually needs what and in what proportion and why. I gave my grandchildren equal education trusts because they are equally innocent. I gave Kevin the house because he is the one who needs a foundation and because he will preserve it and because Amara needs to know there is a home. This is not unfair to Marcus and Denise. This is me seeing clearly and acting accordingly. I want you to understand that honesty is an act of love, even when it does not feel like it to the person receiving it. I could have let the new will be a surprise. I could have let Patricia's office handle it. I could have been spared the table in August and Marcus's controlled voice and Denise's contained tears. I chose not to be spared any of it, because these are my children and they deserved the truth from me while I was alive to tell it and explain it and sit at the table while they absorbed it. That is what a mother who loves her children does. Not smoothing things over, not protecting people from what's real. Speaking true. I want you to understand what Kevin showed me and what it meant. Kevin came into that hospital room and he said, she's right there. and he left because he could not be part of a conversation that treated his mother as a future transaction while she was 4 feet away in a hospital bed. He came back and he held my hand and he said, "I'm here. Mama, you rest." He brought CVS carnations in a plastic pitcher. He is the child who never had the most. He is the child who showed me, in that hospital room, who he was when nobody was watching. That is the thing I want you to hold. Not the will, not the house, not the legal mechanics of any of it. I want you to hold the image of a man in a postal uniform carrying carnations who looked at a situation and chose, without calculation, simply to be present. Because that is the rarest thing. That is the thing worth everything. I am 71 years old. My gardenias are 26 years old and they are doing fine. My pound cake is still store-bought and nobody has figured out it's store-bought because I put it on a good plate. My legal documents are in order and my attorney is excellent and my house is going to stay in the family. And I am still here, still thinking, still watching, still writing things down on yellow legal pads when the occasion requires. Not everybody gets to lie, very still in a hospital room and learn exactly who the people around them are. It is a particular kind of gift. Uncomfortable, clarifying, the kind of gift that comes wrapped in something hard to unwrap. I am grateful for it. I am grateful for the full picture, even the parts that hurt. My mother used to say, "Baby, the truth is always the most valuable thing in the room, even when it costs you something to hear it." She was right. She was always right. I am Vivian Louise Prescott. I am 71 years old. I have 3 children and 3 grandchildren and a house full of gardenias and 1 very good attorney. I heard what I heard. I did what I did. And I have not one single regret. You hold your head up, baby. You see clearly. You love boldly and you move accordingly. That's all.